Okay, welcome everyone. Why don't we go ahead and get started? My name is Iris Caldwell. I'm at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and want to welcome you to today's webinar, where we're going to be providing an overview of some strategic planning work that we're doing for the Rights of Way as Habitat Working Group. I'm joined today by my colleague, Caroline Hernandez, and the two of us have been working with our steering committee initially and now more recently a task force to dive into this strategic planning work along with a consultant, the Institute of Conservation Leadership, that we're working with to really dig into understanding the future of the Rights of Way Working Group, where we should be prioritizing our work and our activities, and are excited to engage you in some of these updates today, and hopefully get some input from you that will be informative as we're moving forward in the planning process. Just a couple of announcements here before we get started. One, all of you are muted as we're in the GoToWebinar platform. But if you have any questions on any topic related to the working group as we're going through today, go ahead and submit those into the chat box, and we should have some time here at the end for questions. And also, we will be recording today's webinar and making the webinar recording available afterwards. So if there's any point you want to return to or circle back with us, the recording will be available. Our agenda today is to begin with just a really quick history and overview of the working group, then an overview of the strategic planning process that we're undertaking for the Rights of Way Working Group, and then we'll spend a little bit more time on a recent impact assessment that was conducted with a third-party organization with a number of you involved in the working group earlier this year. So we wanted to share the results of that impact assessment before we talk about some of the next steps as part of the strategic planning process. So to begin, just again with an overview of the Rights of Way Working Group, this is really what we like to think of as a true network model. As you can see from this illustration, one of the unique things about the Rights of Way Working Group is we're bringing together stakeholders from across the energy sectors, the transportation sectors, engaging with government agencies at all levels, technical experts, nonprofits, and really that has allowed us to have a very unique mix of conversations, strategizing, and working collaboratively together in a way to build innovative strategies and resources and tools to help promote the work of habitat on energy and transportation lands. And over the course of the last 6 years, we've engaged more than 400 organizations in the Rights of Way Working Group, more than 1,700 individuals across the United States and Canada. And so our reach through the working group has been pretty extensive. And again, I think that's been some of the unique value and energy that we've all felt as we've been engaged in the working group. And some of what we've really then considered, and if you go to the next slide, are some of the unique aspects that the working group is able to provide in that kind of network model. So through some of the tools that we've developed, we've been a place where there can be unique, innovative conservation strategies that can be developed. That cross-sector learning and collaboration, particularly across the energy and transportation sectors, but also, again, experts working across all different industry sectors and landscapes have been able to inform a lot of the best practices and the tools and the strategies that we've worked together as a working group. We provide a resource clearinghouse. So we're a place where energy companies, transportation agencies, and others can go to find resources for habitat management on energy and transportation lands. And we're also a knowledge network. Many of you have very valuable experiences as you've engaged in habitat restoration or management on your lands, and providing places for you to share those experiences, others to learn from you, is an important part of, again, that exchange aspect of the network. And this is what I like to think of as a abbreviated timeline of the last 6 years that we've been facilitating the Rights of Way Working Group at University of Illinois, Chicago. I won't go through every single one of these points, but wanted to highlight again some of the key milestones that we've had over the past 6 years. So the working group formed back in 2015. Some of you were at that very first working group meeting, and you can see our working group meetings on this timeline indicated by those yellow diamonds. We've had 9 of those working group meetings over the 6 years, or at least in that time frame when we were able to meet in person. And those working group meetings really provided a backbone for us to come together, can have these discussions, learn from each other, work on developing tools and strategies. We had a steering committee that was involved early on in helping to shape kind of the initial direction of the RightsofWay working group, helping identify, again, some of those priorities for those initial working group meetings, as well as thinking about funding opportunities and tools and other projects that we should be undertaking. And some of those big tools and efforts you'll hear more about in a minute, but just thinking about, again, kind of the timeline and growth of the working group over this 6-year period, we started with some early project ideas like a geospatial habitat database. The Monarch CCAA in 2018 became a big initiative that we're continuing to manage and facilitate or administer. The pollinator scorecard, new website tools. And then when we moved into the COVID pandemic era, we've really tried to utilize as best we can some of the virtual tools and platforms that are out there. So virtual roundup was something that we tried last year, and continue to use web meetings and other sorts of tools like that to advance task force work and other projects that we're working on. So next slide, I believe Caroline will be talking about some of these specific efforts.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so Iris went over the history and briefly touched on some of these core efforts, but we wanted to take another moment to just really dive into the main things that the RightsofWay as Habitat Working Group has been focusing on. And starting with the Monarch Canada Conservation Agreement with assurances, this has been kind of the more prominent effort over the past couple of years, especially once it was finalized 2 years ago or nearly 2 years ago. And this was created by more than 40 industry partners, and it now has more than 28 partners committing to 800,000 acres of conservation conservation acres for habitat. We also have a pollinator habitat scorecard for energy and transportation organizations to track the quality of their habitat on their lands. And they can also do this through the geospatial habitat database, and a geospatial database for organizations to monitor their habitat efforts and keep an eye on them. Like this one, we continue to hold webinars, a couple of webinars or a handful of webinars every year, and case studies. And as Iris mentioned, before the pandemic, we were holding nearly 2 in-person workshops a year. We have an online discussion board for organizations and participants to go in and ask questions or answer any questions, and a resources library with case studies, tools, best management practices. And then we also have an interactive seed map where energy and transportation organizations can find seed vendors and seed specialists near them. We are currently taking part, or we're hosting a solar pollinator research initiative looking at co-locating pollinator habitat at large-scale solar facilities, and finalizing our cost-benefit calculator feasibility study as well. We have habitat-related news that we keep up to date on our website, as well as calendar items for pollinator-related activities that are happening over the year. And then, of course, we have a working group directory so people can stay in contact with the partnerships that they've made over these activities. So that's kind of an overview of what our the core efforts of the RightsofWay's Habitat Working Group. And I'd like you all to think about what programs or resources are most valuable from this core efforts table. And we're actually going to have you partake in a little poll to actually tell us what are the top 3 most valuable working group programs or resources. So Iris is adding in a link to menti.com. And if you're on like your cell phone or a tablet and you can't click that link, you can just go to menti.com and use that code at the very top to access it. And then just select the 3 most valuable working group programs or resources that you use and rely on, so we can get a better idea of what's helpful for you all. And we have our first responses. Thank you. Looks like the Monarch CCA toolkit, the scorecard, webinars, cost benefit study. Excellent. Got 4 responses so far and 57 of you. So I'm hoping to get a few more responses from all of the attendees. Okay. Toolkit, Monarch CCAA toolkit is pretty popular, it looks like. And I'm happy to see that the cost benefit study, the resources library, even one for the discussion board, working group directory. This is neat. Okay, I'm gonna give it about 30 more seconds to let people respond. Remember, and please let us know in the chat if you're having trouble, but just clicking that link that Iris put into the chat and doing the first 3 should be your easiest way to tell us. Top 3. It's getting pretty close between webinars and the CCAA toolkit. Okay, so that's very helpful and appreciate that. Let's see.
Great, thanks, Caroline. And thanks everyone for responding to that poll. We're gonna have a couple of polls that will be sending your way here during the webinar today. And so I encourage you to keep that Menti webpage open. And if you wanna continue to vote on that first question, that's just fine. We love that kind of feedback. So next phase here of our webinar, I wanted to move into really, again, diving into this strategic planning process and why are we planning now? You know, what has prompted this strategic road mapping effort? Well, one, we have certainly recognized that the RightsofWay Working Group has been around now for 6 fabulous years. We've, I think, had some real successes and wins as a working group on a variety of collaborative projects. And so we felt it was necessary to take a step back and reaffirm or potentially refine our understanding and commitment to the purpose of the working group. Again, the landscape that we're operating in terms of the tools and the projects and the needs of the participants in the working group has certainly evolved over those 6 years. And so this is an opportunity for us to revisit the mission and vision and values of the working group and make sure that those are still in alignment with what we all need and want. And so in doing that, we hope to both identify and prioritize the work of the RightsofWay Working Group, both over the short term, so the next 1 to 2 years, the midterm, the next 3 to 5 years, as well as provide just a broad long-term kind of direction and strategy for the working group. This will allow us to ensure that we're evolving, as an effective and nimble network, and provide an opportunity for some greater ownership by the industry leaders and partners that are involved in the working group. And of course, this also helps us map out our long-term resources strategy. So understanding better what our funding needs will be over the next 3 to 5+ years, staff and participant time, how much do we expect will be again facilitated through the university versus different industry partners taking on certain roles, as well as thinking about what expertise we need within the working group. So again, it is an important time in the planning process. This idea of doing a strategic plan and some more targeted road mapping for the working group actually originated a couple years ago. In 2019, after our last in-person workshop, our steering committee convened and really identified the need to do some more concerted strategic planning. And so we started doing some initial scoping. Of course, COVID hit at that point and kind of everything was up in the air. So we've continued kind of over the last 2 years to continue to kind of shape the scope of what we envisioned we wanted to accomplish through the strategic planning process. And then really this year, we're able to kind of line up the resources and the team to begin the process. Also, coincidentally, through one of the partners and funding organizations that has supported the working group, we had the opportunity to engage in an impact assessment with a third-party organization called the Context Network. And you'll hear more about that here in a minute. But that impact assessment, I think, is a really good starting point for us to better understand the outcomes and impacts that the working group has had to date and use that as a springing board to think about, again, some of these future needs and strategies. This fall, we've formally kicked off our internal strategic planning effort with a task force of about 20 partners across the working group. And through that task force, we'll be conducting interviews and a survey of the broader working group. That is anticipated for early next year, January, February timeframe. Based on that, the task force again will reconvene and summarize that input that we get through the interviews and surveys and form some recommendations, again, about those priorities, about some of the strategies and resource needs that we have going forward. And then we anticipate in the spring, April, May timeframe, we'll have a final set of recommendations that we'll be able to share with the working group. We'll have another webinar at that point, and we'll be able to, again, hopefully move forward with our new vision and plan. So that's the overall process. I mentioned here that we have this strategic task force. So I wanted to just take a moment to both recognize, again, these dedicated individuals and their organizations who've agreed to participate on this task force. And it was important to us as we were forming this task force to identify representatives across, again, the different industry sectors and other stakeholder groups that have been involved or engaged in some way in the working group. So I'll just take a moment for you to scan this list. And would also encourage you to think about, again, if you have any specific comments or feedback and you are familiar or know any of these individuals, that these would be folks that you could reach out to share those thoughts. Okay, why don't we then move on to learn a little bit more about that impact assessment that was conducted earlier this year. And Caroline, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. So as Iris mentioned, the North Central Integrated Pest Management Center has worked with the Context Network in the past and asked the Context Network to perform an impact assessment on the working groups that NCIPMC supports. And so the purpose of this impact assessment was to gauge the effectiveness, overall outreach and impact of the working groups and their activities And this included general awareness of the working group and what it was doing, the resources that it was providing and creating, and its outputs. If there were any behavior shifts that resulted from the working group activities around pollinator-oriented vegetation management, what those impacts of the resources and tools were, and other improvement measures that would or that were related to quality and sustainability of vegetation management and how these organizations were interacting with the land around, thinking about pollinator habitat. So what the Context Network did was they worked with Iris and I, and they created a list of interview questions. And over 2 months, they interviewed 5 departments of transportation, 4 energy companies, and 1 industry contractor. And then they came up with survey questions to send out to the full Rights of Ways Habitat Working Group. And through these interviews and surveys, they were trying to get a handle on what resources and tools of the working group do you use? What kind of outcomes have you or your organization experienced? How could things be improved, or how could the working group provide that additional value? What's missing or could be created to support your pollinator efforts more? Which are the resources that are most important to maintain and are most beneficial? How could those be improved? And then why is this working group unique, and why are these organizations and participating in it? And so through these interviews and surveys, we received some really constructive feedback that we wanted to share with everybody. And we're also taking this into account for our strategic road mapping. So 3 out of 4 of the participants said that the working group does an excellent job in creating this open and constructive knowledge network. And so what you're looking at is this graph that says this percentage of people rated these activities as 8 or higher on a scale of 10. And so what's highlighted in that orange box is that that open and constructive knowledge network. But I also think it's important to pay attention to some of these other higher ranking ones as well. Right next to it, tied, participants noted that the Rights of Ways Habitat Working Group was able to connect them to experts and peers, and then address some of those habitat and conservation challenges and concerns, and also provide that clearinghouse of data and tools and resources that can help support organizations in their creation and conservation of pollinator habitat. And even facilitate that cross-sector collaboration, that cross-industry collaboration, thinking about rights of way and habitat. And so those were some of the most notable activities that participants said that they thought the working group did an excellent job on. When thinking about actual resources, the top 5 that were most utilized, again, were those live stream webinars. And I think we saw that in this most recent poll that you all filled out. It's the webinars are really highly utilized. The Monarch CCAA toolkit, as you all pointed out as well, that resources library with case studies and tools, and then the in-person working group meetings, which of course we haven't been able to host for the past 2 years, but still we're fresh in people's minds. And then that pollinator habitat scorecard and management module was also highly rated with most valuable. But we also got feedback from this graph and just from the interviews and the surveys um, that there was an opportunity and a desire to engage users more with the geospatial habitat database, the online discussion board on the website, and the interactive seed map. So though they're not often utilized at this point, people indicated that they were interested in using them, that it wasn't just as available, or they weren't as aware about these resources as these other activities. And so I thought that was a really positive feedback as well. In terms of communication and coordination activities, so again, those web meetings, the in-person meetings and the webinars have just been the most valuable. And thinking about uh, participants indicating that cross-sector collaboration was valuable, the web meetings, the webinars, and the in-person meetings really help facilitate just people getting to talk to other people that they might not have had access to before that. And which also supports some of that knowledge sharing and problem solving for pollinator habitat conservation. Thinking about future activities, so the webinars and the web meetings and in-person meetings have been the most popular. Likelihood to participate in these future events as well. Again, still a lot of support for the webinars, and people are thinking about the future in terms of utilizing those tools like the pollinator habitat scorecard, the geospatial habitat database, the interactive seed map on the website. Eventually things will go back to normal, I think, and I think people are considering that as well, and thinking about getting back into the field and boots on the ground and how they can use that. And then close after that is the access to resources on the website, utilizing those tools and those case studies to help build that support. Some additional takeaways were that the working group is still unique and useful to the participants. People said that it was diverse and forward-looking, and it was helpful that it had some large corporate partners at the table. That level of cross-sector collaboration. Of course, the Monarch CCAA program is unique in of itself, and one we had at least one person say that it was a one-stop shop for information needs, thinking about that resources library, and finding some of those practical solutions to sometimes complex problems. I'll give you just a minute. I'm not going to read the quotes to you, but I'll give you just a minute to read the quotes over yourself. Okay, so with all of that in mind, we're interested in your input as well. And though maybe some of you participated in the survey, the more data, the better. And we'd really like to know, these are quotes, and this is information about how some of working group participants have benefited, but now we would like to know how you all have benefited. And so Iris can, she's just put that link back in, but the same link, if you kept your browser window open again, has, I've changed the question. And so now you're given an option of writing a couple of words, ideally about 3 words, of how you have most benefited from participating in the working group. And we will, let's see here. And it will automatically pop up as a word cloud, and the words that are most commonly written or used will automatically become bigger, and so you can see as you write in what is most common. Networking, excellent. Okay, we've got engagement and partnerships, knowledge and peer interactions, expertise, the community, resources is becoming a bigger one. Networking is still prominent. The research. Ooh, I'm having trouble keeping up. Okay. Partnerships is still big. Knowledge sharing, collaboration. These are great responses. Tools and resources. The scorecard. Lay of the land. I like that one. Knowledge gained. Advice. Ooh, supporting analytics. Excellent. Strategy. Botanical documentation. Multiple pull benefits. I'm missing any engagement information. So I'm still seeing collaboration as a strong one, resources and tools, networking, that cross-sector collaboration and cross-industry networking, and problem solving through some of the task forces and things like that. Okay, just a few more seconds. See, some people are still adding in how they have benefited from the Rights of Ways Habitat Working Group. Wade in shallow end. I like that. That's. I'm hoping that means we've made it an easy entrance for anybody that is interested in pollinator habitat on energy and transportation lands, and you don't have to have a lot of background knowledge. Perspective. Okay, pollinator knowledge. Okay. So with that, oh, a couple more of you. Let's see, ideas, partnerships. Okay. Well, thank you. We'll keep it open for a little bit longer. So if something comes to you while we continue, please feel free to add it in, and we can make this available later on. So thank you. And so we did the poll, and I am going to hand it back now to Iris.
Great, thanks, Caroline. And yeah, what a neat way to illustrate, again, some of those themes. So yes, as we're thinking ahead, building on that impact assessment that Caroline just walked through, as I said earlier, we have kicked off our short-term strategic task force that is going to be working with us over the next couple of months to really, again, refine and develop some priorities and recommendations for the future of the working group. And so I just thought it would be helpful to also share some of the initial feedback and things that we've been hearing from the task force, again, as they've been reviewing the impact assessment in more detail, and again, thinking about from their experiences and perspective where they see kind of the direction of the working group moving. So again, what we've heard in some of our initial conversations with the task force is that recognition, again, that the work of the working group has really evolved over the past 6 years, as has the work of other industry groups that are maybe looking at similar issues around habitat on energy and transportation lands. And so we want to take a very thoughtful approach to thinking about where the working group best fits, as well as where we hope to end up. Like, what does success look like for us in the next 5 to 10 years? and really maximize the unique value that the working group is providing. We don't need to be repeating or certainly competing with any other activities that other groups may be undertaking, and really trying to find those unique opportunities that we have to fill gaps, fill industry needs, find areas for collaboration with other groups, and really build upon the momentum that we've seen over the past 6 years. How can we focus on some of the strengths and some of the successes that we've had as a working group, and also not be afraid? We've had several task force members say very frankly, don't be afraid to stop doing things that just aren't working. So we need to think about, again, where does it make sense for us to be putting our energy and our resources, and make sure that those are the things that are most needed and can really maximize that benefit. We're going to be looking for ways to encourage participants in the working group to have more ownership and leadership in the working group activities and the projects and resources that we're undertaking. We need to find ways to integrate new participants into the working group that have additional information or expertise or perspectives to share that we can all learn from, and how to manage a certain level of partner turnover. Again, as the working group has continued to evolve and as different organizations kind of come and go in terms of their interest and involvement in the working group, we want to be able to kind of manage that change. And we've also heard some of the hot topics that are on people's minds. So thinking again about pollinators, but maybe beyond the monarch. Certainly with the monarch CCAA, we've had a strong focus on the monarch butterfly and conservation associated with the monarch. There's certainly opportunities to expand to other pollinators, but also other types of wildlife. And so that's something for us to consider. Tying into biodiversity reporting and goals, since a lot of organizations are increasingly looking at those opportunities. Always and from the very beginning has been interest around the business case for habitat. So continuing to find ways to support building that business case. Carbon reduction, climate change, those related issues are still very strongly in people's minds, and finding ways to maybe link habitat conservation to carbon reduction goals is another opportunity. And then ongoing interest around permitting and regulatory tools, maybe building again upon the Monarch CCAA, or again, a new Bumblebee agreement that we're considering, but providing space for that seems to be strong interest. So those again are some of the initial ideas, and we'll continue to flesh those out with the task force. And next, I wanted to share a concept that comes from kind of a network mindset theory. And as we think about the Rights of Way's Habitat Working Group, and if you recall back to that diagram I showed at the very beginning, with really that network model, that we're coming from different perspectives, different industries, all bringing our experiences. One of the things that that folks that study kind of organizational structures and networks in particular have noted is this idea of a give-get ratio. And the most effective networks really operate in this sense that people feel like they're getting something valuable from participating in the network, but they also feel like they have an opportunity to give something back, either to their peers, supporting the network. And so finding this balance of giving and getting, where everyone feels kind of energized by both seeing the value of their participation and also, again, supporting others, if that's through time or funding or again, communicating or sharing information with others. There's a variety of ways you can give and get, but that's something that we want to keep in mind. And so as we think about, and we're kind of building on some of these polling questions that we've been asking, we want you to think about, again, what have you gotten? We asked that in the last poll question, but what are opportunities to give to the network? And Caroline, sorry, I'm kind of leading into this next poll, but I'll let you take it from here if you want to run the next Menti.
Okay, thank you. No, I would have let you keep going. So as Iris said, thinking about what you're getting from the working group, which is what we've been trying to kind of get at the last two polls, but also going in and thinking about how can you contribute to the working group. And so we have set in the link again to the Menti poll. But again, if you've closed it and you just want to go to menti.com, feel free to go there. And we've got one response. They are willing to and interested in participating on a task force. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the task forces are the groups of people and organizations that have contributed to creating the Monarch Candidate Conservation Agreement with assurances. And as we are finalizing that cost benefit calculator feasibility study, that was done with a task force, the pollinator habitat scorecard. So there are a number of task forces that are working on attacking challenges and providing solutions to them. So, and maybe I've talked that up now too much and skewed the results, but we've got participating on a task force as pretty popular right now. And then supporting the working group through paying a membership fee is tied with sharing habitat case studies for technical expertise. And then participating in online discussion board on our website. And as Iris chatted in, please feel free to select all that apply. You are not held to just one. We want the working group and that cross-industry collaboration, and works best when everybody is collaborating on multiple things. So the task force is still leading strong, but the sharing the habitat cases and technical expertise is close behind it. Even serving in a leadership role, which is always welcome, sponsoring a working group program or the project. And we've co-located our working group in-person meetings in the past. And so thinking about, we've got the facility, we've got a great chef or something like that, we could definitely host a working group workshop or event next time we're doing that in person. That's also an ability. And if you select other, which 3 people have, please feel free to chat it in to the chat and I can read them out. Would be happy to, or I'm interested to see what the three people who have said they have other ways that they can contribute to the working group. Okay. Still looking like task force is the most common. Not seeing those chats yet for other, but am excited to see what those are. Okay. Couple more seconds if you've got another thing that you would like to, that you are interested in contributing or can do to support the Rights of Ways Habitat Working Group. All right. Well, I will leave this poll open. So as you, maybe if I can get it out, as you think about other things that you might be interested in contributing, please feel free to continue adding to it. And we are eagerly awaiting your responses. So with that, I am going to have Iris take over from here.
Okay. Yep, thank you. So yeah, just wanted to highlight some next steps and what you can expect. And again, this is kind of recapping some of the points that I mentioned at the beginning as far as our planning process and timeline. So over the next couple of months, our task force is going to be meeting to develop and refine an interview plan and survey. The interviews and surveys we plan to go out in January and February timeframe. So stay tuned for those. We'll be inviting a range of partners and participants in the working group to participate in interviews. And then also, again, we'll have a broad survey that will go out to the full working group. So encourage you to look for those opportunities and respond as you can. Then after the task force has been able to come together and review that feedback and develop some recommendations, we will have another webinar late spring timeframe, so April, May, where we'll present the findings from the additional work that the task force has done, as well as the recommendations. And at that point, we'll hopefully again have some exciting updates and strategies to share as far as how we've been able to take the feedback that you all have provided and give some additional direction and priorities to the working group. So we're really excited about this process. Again, it's been a couple of years in the making and are looking forward to hearing more from you, all of you, as well as, again, having maybe some additional clarity on where we should focus our energy and time going forward. So with that, it looks like we have just about 15 minutes or so. Wanted to save some time for some questions for those of you who are on the webinar today. So again, if you haven't yet had a chance to access your chat box, you should in your panel for GoToWebinar have access to a chat box, and you can chat a question in there. And we're happy to take questions or suggestions or any other ideas that you'd like to share at this point. And we have a couple minutes here that we can respond to those.
Iris, I'm seeing one question of how people could, share their thoughts and opinions and excitement about the strategic process, especially if they have any of their own experience that they wanted to share.
Yeah, great question. So I've included both my and Caroline's email addresses here. So I would say that's a good starting point if you'd like to reach out to us with any specific thoughts or, again, general experiences that you've had working through a similar kind of strategic planning process, or if you're involved with another industry organization that's also interested in pollinator habitat on energy and transportation lands, if you see an opportunity for collaboration or potentially, again, an opportunity for us to focus in a particular direction or area, we're very interested in hearing that type of feedback. So I would say start with an email to us. And then we also shared the list of other task force participants. We would also encourage you to reach out to any of those task force members as well if you have additional thoughts that maybe you don't want to share with us directly. I see a question here about, are we making plans for an in-person meeting possibly in fall 2022? That's a great question. As we noted, we sadly have not had an in-person meeting. I think our last one was September 2019, if I recall correctly. It seems like an era ago. And we currently do not have plans in the making for an in-person meeting. I think we're, like so many, are still trying to get a sense on what's going to be possible, both, for safety reasons, but also in terms of what level of industry participation we might be able to get in an in-person meeting. So that's something that we are still evaluating. Would certainly take suggestions or thoughts from you all if you feel strongly one way or the other. In the interim, we definitely want to still make space in a virtual context for us to connect and network, albeit that isn't the same as doing it in person. But it is something that we hope to be able to do eventually, again, just still thinking about the right timing for it.
And for the people that have just found out about some of the resources that we mentioned in the webinar that didn't know about them in the past, how would they go and find those, like the geospatial habitat database?
Yeah, that's a great question. Why don't we, and I can grab it here, Caroline, or you, the main RightsofWay Working Group webpage is a great starting point. So we can drop that in the chat here. That's a great place to go, basically to get any of the resources that we mentioned already on the webinar today. So we have all of the tools that have been developed that were mentioned, the resources library, the recordings of past webinars, as well as recordings from past in-person working group meetings, the CCIA toolkit, a calendar, news headlines place. So all of those can be accessed through the website. We do have some resources that are behind a login screen, but creating a user account is free. You do have to provide just some basic information about yourself and your organization, and then you get easy access to the rest of the tools and resources that we have there. So certainly encourage you to go to the website if you want more information on any of the things that we mentioned. Will the RightsofWay Working Group incorporate other industry guidelines for the scorecard and cost-benefit analysis guidance, say for DOT, mining, BLM land? And what about the new Bee and Butterfly Habitat Fund Pollinator Habitat Establishment and Management Guide document? Thanks, James, for mentioning that. That's a fantastic resource, the Bee and Butterfly Fund new guideline. That's available in our, I believe it's under Best Management Practices, under the Resources Library. So we're constantly searching and adding resources to the Resources Library. So if you don't find a resource there and you know of one, certainly email us and we'll get that added to the Resources Library. So that one in particular is there. We do have other industry guidelines. Sometimes those are classified as other resources, so they might not be in the same category of best management practices or case studies if they're not directly related to energy or transportation lands. But I know we have some guidelines, say, for instance, for cities, guidelines for federal lands that could be relevant to energy and transportation land managers. And so anything like that that's potentially relevant, we'd like to try to include in the resources library as well. Okay, another question here. How do we bring the great work that we're doing to the state regulatory level? Maybe a roadshow or get the federal regulators to present on how to break these misconceptions. And Lou, I think you're referring to misconceptions around habitat on energy and transportation lands. So great question there. I think one of the, again, opportunities that we've tried to facilitate through the RightsofWay Working Group is bringing state and federal regulators and agencies to the table and at the working group meetings and webinars and various task forces that we facilitate. So I think that's something that, again, can be a unique value that the working group can provide. I know in some of the initial conversations we've been having with the task force, there's been interest in bringing some additional federal agencies in particular to the table. Historically, we've worked primarily with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but I think there's interest and potential to maybe expand to the U.S. Forest Service, BLM, Bureau of Land Management, other federal agencies that may be interested or have opportunities to work with energy and transportation land managers. So that's certainly an opportunity that has been flagged already. And as far as the state regulatory level, again, I think there's opportunities, and we certainly have done work at state or regional levels to present about the work of the RightsofWay working group, engage with state initiatives that are focused on pollinator habitat, or even more specifically on energy and transportation lands. Caroline and I recently have been working with an organization that facilitates and supports the state level pesticide safety training, and they're interested in incorporating some more content into state level trainings around pesticide use and safety that could again support pollinator friendly habitat. So I think we're continually looking for those types of opportunities, and again would welcome any way that we can facilitate some of those conversations within your state or region. We'd be happy to do that. So great idea. Looks like we have just a couple minutes left. If there's any other questions or comments. As I mentioned at the beginning, we'll also share a recording of today's webinar, and we can also share the final outputs from those Menti polls. I think that word cloud in particular is a pretty cool output from today's discussion. And again, really appreciate your willingness to share some of those ideas and thoughts. We'll be definitely taking those back to the task force and building that into, again, some of our strategy planning and development of the interview guides and survey as well.